Thank you very much. Ms. Miller.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for holding this hearing today. Very timely, as others have said. My name is Kristen Miller, and I'm director of the New York program for the Corporation for Supportive Housing. CSH's mission is to advance solutions that use housing as a platform to deliver services, improve the lives of the most vulnerable people, and build healthy communities. We have a 25-year track record here in New York City of innovation and investment in New York. So we are also a CDFI lender for supportive housing. And we really focus on analyzing data and assisting in the creation of supportive housing in New York. We've worked on over 15,000 units across the state. We are deeply committed to improving access to supportive housing for people with criminal justice histories and have been working specifically with this population for over a decade. You're going to hear a lot of statistics. An estimated 25,000 people are released from New York State prisons each year, and of these, nearly half return to New York City. Of all the issues facing returning prisoners, the need to secure safe, affordable housing is one of the most essential. Many of those released each year are homeless and have traditionally cycled out of prison and jail and into the shelter system or unlicensed, unregulated three-quarter houses. In fact, an analysis of the New York City Department of Homeless Shelter System has indicated that between 20 and 23% of homeless adults have been incarcerated at some point in just the 2 years prior to entering shelter. And about 19% of persons released from New York State prisons listed shelters as their first known address. So we have a cycle of jail, shelter, prison, incarceration, shelter, back and forth, back and forth. You can also throw in that mix often detox, substance use treatment, and hospital use, mental health, and physical use of the hospital systems. And we heard Joanne and Liz talking about really a continuum of need for housing and services for people reentering. So not everyone looks the same. When we talk about supportive housing, we are talking about those with very high service needs. So those who have co-occurring mental health and substance use disorders, who have histories of homelessness, who don't have family support. Because we know that when they reenter the community in that very early sensitive time period, that if they go into shelter, the likelihood of recidivism for both jail and shelter is going to continue. So we have found that supportive housing breaks that cycle. So what is supportive housing? It's a housing model that couples permanent affordable housing and supportive services, and we know that it's effective. Trish mentioned the FUSE program. We started this about 8 years ago in New York City, and we, like the current JISH model, did this targeting of looking at data to see who's going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and use supportive housing as an intervention. What we found was that we worked with the Columbia University Mailman School of Public Health and completed an evaluation of this brand new initiative at the time that placed over 200 individuals into supportive housing. And we did a 2-year service use pre-supportive housing and post-supportive housing analysis of the 200 individuals. And the rigorous evaluation compared the outcomes of FUSE participants versus a comparison group and demonstrated some major findings impacting the use of jails, shelters, and other crisis care services. So we found that supportive housing can reduce homelessness, incarceration, and costs of public systems. So the individuals have better personal outcomes, and we save all of us taxpayer dollars. FUSE participants averaged just over 2 weeks of shelter stays in the 24 months after placement into housing, as compared to 164 days in shelters spent by the comparison group. 2 weeks versus 164 days. And overall, FUSE generated a $15,000 cost offset for each participant. And we did not have access to Medicaid data, which has been talked about earlier, so we know that's a very, very conservative number. And this model is becoming nationally recognized as an approach for this population and is being implemented in almost 20 communities across the country, and CSH is providing technical assistance. So it's a common sense approach for this deeply targeted need of this particular group of folks. But unfortunately, here in New York, people with criminal justice histories have been shortchanged in every supportive housing production initiative to date. So New York 1, New York 2, and New York 3 here in New York City did not include this population. And so very few units overall have been targeted. So we're saying now is the moment. We cannot lose this moment now for the next 15 years. In this year's State of the State address, as you know, Governor Cuomo proposed a bold housing plan and committed to creating 20,000 new units of supportive housing over the next 15 years, with over 6,000 of the new units to be created in the current upcoming 5 years. But we know in order for this money to be able to be used, we need this MOU signed. So we have until Thursday to get this done. So we're encouraging you and everyone here to put the pressure on. We need it. We cannot have these units held hostage. Additionally, last September, the governor adopted the New York State Council on Reentry and Reintegration's recommendations to, quote, include formerly incarcerated as a target population for supportive housing, unquote. As such, a portion of the 20,000 new supportive housing units should and will be targeted to this population. We do note that the governor did release a couple weeks ago a supportive housing RFP for 1,600 units of supportive housing targeted to people leaving prison and jails, and that's a great start. But why do we need this 6,000 long-term commitment to create this housing? And it comes down to something we've been touching on, which is the development. So in order for supportive housing, affordable housing developers to feel confident that they will invest in property and dedicate their new units to supportive housing, they need a guarantee of operating and service dollars. If they don't have that guarantee, they are not going to commit the housing for supportive housing units. So in a typical tax credit unit, which is what is usually used to develop supportive housing, so we have our 4%, 9% low-income housing tax credit initiatives, that will target people 50 to 80% AMI, even as high as 120%, say, area median income. When we're talking about this population, formerly homeless, formerly incarcerated people, their income AMI levels are maybe 20, 30% AMI. So affordable housing is not affordable for them. It's too expensive. And that's where we need government to step in and give deeper subsidies so that the landlords can earmark some units for the lower rents as subsidized by government, and our folks can have access to those units. But we have to have the long-term funding commitment so that the developers know they will be able to cover rent and still support their asset, support the building, be able to pay the bills, and also pay for staffing, because as Allison and others have mentioned, there are unique service needs for this population. This commitment would effectively stop the cycle of homelessness and criminal justice involvement for thousands of New Yorkers exiting prison and jail each year. And we ask that Governor Cuomo honor this commitment by signing the MOU with your leadership before session ends on Thursday, and target a portion of these units for this population. I think when CSH thinks about the continuum of housing needs, yes, we absolutely need quality transitional housing that meets the unique needs of unique homeless populations. But if there's no place for people to be placed from transitional housing, then the transitional and emergency shelter system gets stuck. So if there were more places for Joanne to place people, she could maybe, instead of serving 100 people a year, she could serve 200 people a year, because there's a flow. The people coming in and there's people going out to quality supportive housing. The last thing I just want to say is that make sure, and this kind of gets to, unfortunately, we bump up against the NIMBY, not in my backyard syndrome all the time when trying to place and get sites for supportive housing. And it's leadership from you guys that can say, this is not a shelter. This is not another program. This is permanent housing. People get a key, they get a lease, they live just like you and I, but because of who they are, they get a little extra support. And we know that that extra support makes them extremely stable and really leads to all kinds of recovery. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Alvin, any questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next panel will be a man for a change, Sebastian Solomon.
Who's counting?
I'm not counting, I'm just observant. Mr. Solomon, you're on.
Hello, my name is Sebastian Solomon. I am the Director of New York State Policy at the Legal Action Center. The Legal Action Center is the only public interest law and policy organization in New York and the United States whose sole mission is to fight discrimination against and protect the privacy of people in recovery from substance use disorders, individuals living with HIV/AIDS, and people with criminal records. I'm also the co-chair of the Coalition of Reentry Advocates, a group of organizations that seeks to eliminate barriers that keep too many people with criminal records out of jobs and housing. I want to thank the committees for organizing a hearing on this important topic. Much of my testimony has been covered by previous speakers, so I will try not to repeat what they have said. People who have been involved with the criminal justice system face a number of significant obstacles. These obstacles prevent them from succeeding as full community members by limiting their access to essential needs and benefits, including family, shelter, work, education, civic participation, and financial stability. Finding and securing quality, stable housing is among the most difficult challenges faced by this population. In a city that already suffers from a significant lack of safe, stable, affordable housing, those who have been involved in the criminal justice system are often among the population's least able to find a safe place to live. While New York State has had laws protecting people with criminal records from discrimination in employment and licensing for nearly 40 years, no such protections exist for housing. As a result, landlords regularly deny housing to applicants with criminal records, irrespective of the severity of their crime, the time that has elapsed since committing the crime, or evidence of rehabilitation. In fact, landlords in New York can even deny an individual housing based solely on an arrest that did not result in a conviction. As a result, people with criminal records often end up in unsafe housing conditions or in the shelter system. Yet safe, stable housing is essential to the ability of individuals to participate in society and is a key component in avoiding recidivism. Housing enables individuals to achieve the stability that they need to find and maintain employment. Housing also enables people to take care of their health, which in turn also contributes significantly to their ability to work. This impact is particularly significant for the large numbers of individuals who have been involved in the criminal justice system who suffer from chronic health conditions such as HIV/AIDS, substance use disorders, and mental disorders. When this population is unable to take care of its health, it is more likely to use expensive resources such as hospitals and detox facilities. It is also less likely to have further involvement with the criminal justice system. I wish to put supportive housing within the broader housing context for this population. There have been a number of changes in housing policies affecting individuals with histories of criminal justice involvement. In 2014, both San Francisco, California, and Newark, New Jersey passed ordinances that bar housing providers from asking about certain types of criminal record information, delay the timing of legally permissible inquiries until later in the rental process, and require that the provider perform an individualized determination in making a decision about whether to admit the individual into housing. Madison and Dane County, Wisconsin had similar policies from the 1970s until 2011, when the Wisconsin legislature passed legislation eliminating these protections. In fact, Madison's ordinance made it illegal for landlords to consider most criminal record information if more than 2 years had passed since the tenant was placed on probation, paroled, released from incarceration, or paid a fine. In November 2015, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development issued guidance for public housing authorities and owners of federally assisted housing to inform them that arrest records alone could not be the basis for denying admission terminating assistance, or evicting tenants. Then, in April 2016, HUD offered guidance to all housing providers and real estate entities regarding the possibility that taking adverse housing actions, such as a refusal to rent or renew a lease on the basis of an individual's criminal history, could constitute illegal race discrimination based on the fact that African American and Hispanics are arrested, convicted, and incarcerated at rates disproportionate to their share of the general population. Both New York City and New York State have also begun to take steps to ease some of the barriers to housing listed above. In September 2015, as you've heard, Governor Cuomo announced that he was adopting 12 recommendations developed by the New York State Council on Community Reentry and Reintegration, of which Legal Action Center is a member, including adopting new anti-discrimination guidance for New York State financed housing, creating new housing and treatment capacity for mentally ill people leaving state prison, including formerly incarcerated people as a target population for supportive housing, and allowing individuals returning home from state prison to live with spouses and partners. These measures are important steps that will help limit the instability faced by individuals leaving jails and prisons. They also provide important ways by which New York City and state can decrease homelessness among people coming out of prisons and jails. We look forward to continuing to work with the state to help implement and enforce these new policies. The Legal Action Center is also a member of the steering committee of the Three-Quarter House Reform Coalition, which you've heard about. The coalition has made a number of legislative and policy recommendations to the city and state, including calling for the creation of a rent subsidy for those living in or at risk of living in these houses. Last year, partly as a way of addressing the circumstances in three-quarter houses, New York City created the Special Exit and Prevention Supplement, or SEPS, to provide services and rental subsidies to eligible individuals, adults, and families to assist them in obtaining stable housing. A similar program was piloted in Washington State in 2007. 2 years after implementation, recipients of the subsidy, all formerly incarcerated, were significantly less likely to have a new conviction, have their community supervision revoked, and/or be readmitted to prison, demonstrating that these subsidies can be an important tool in moving people out of predatory and unsafe living conditions into stable housing and helping them to succeed in the community. The Legal Action Center is also a member of the steering committee for the NYCHA Permanent Exclusion Working Group, which you have heard about from Allison Wilkie earlier. As you heard, in a city already lacking in affordable housing, this policy prevents individuals from rejoining their families, thereby increasing competition for the limited existing affordable housing stock, as well as removing the potential stability provided by returning to live with family. NYCHA has already taken steps to reduce some of the harm caused by these policies, and we look forward to continuing to work with them to continue improving them. At the same time, housing needs for this population, as with other segments of the population, exist on a continuum. Many individuals coming out of incarceration may simply need a safe, stable place to live. Others may need some basic level of services to help them reintegrate and readjust to life in the community. Others, however, need the more significant menu of services that are offered by high-quality supportive housing. This population often has some of the highest needs, making it among the most challenging to serve. Partly as a result, those with criminal histories are often the least able to obtain the supportive housing services they need, even as the proportion of incarcerated individuals diagnosed with mental illness has climbed dramatically over the last decade, increasing the need for these type of housing and supportive services. The Legal Action Center therefore joins with our many partners in calling for the city and the state to dedicate 15% of newly built supportive housing units to appropriately targeted individuals returning from prison or jail. However, because the obstacles faced by people in need of supportive housing who have criminal justice histories are similar to those faced by all special needs populations, we recommend that 15% of each category of special needs housing created in any new initiative be targeted to serve people in this population group, rather than creating a separate justice-involved target population. Furthermore, those with a history of justice involvement who are eligible for supportive housing should not be segregated by their status as individuals with criminal records, but instead should be integrated with other populations based on their level of care needs. It is also important that structures and incentives be put in place to ensure that the most vulnerable of those with criminal justice involvement not be excluded from this housing, so that they can receive the supportive housing services they need. Lastly, it is essential that supportive services offered be comprehensive and appropriate to the specific needs of the targeted population. To help achieve these goals, the working group assembled by the Corporation for Supportive Housing, of which LAC is a member, has developed recommendations of factors that should be used to identify and serve appropriate individuals. A copy of these recommendations is included with my testimony. The effectiveness of these types of interventions has been demonstrated by pilots such as CSH's FUSE model, which you've already heard about. We have also heard repeatedly about the importance of signing the MOU in the coming days. For decades, individuals who have been involved with the criminal justice system, who have significant physical and behavioral health needs, have all too often faced overwhelming barriers to reentry and participation in society, while receiving little or no support to help them reintegrate. As a result, too many of these individuals end up cycling back and forth between incarceration and the community. These individuals are also often among the most frequent users of expensive shelters, emergency rooms, and detox facilities. Targeting supportive housing services at this population will help move individuals out of this costly and counterproductive cycle so that they can maintain their health and better contribute to society while making better use of limited city and state resources. Thank you again for your time and for holding this important hearing.
Thank you very much for coming, Mr. Sepulveda.
Yes, one question, Mr. Solomon. You indicated that Milwaukee had the ordinance for about 12, 15 years?
More than 30 years.
More than 30 years. Was there any event, anything that precipitated them?
I've been trying to find that out, and I will try and get back to you on that. But my understanding is, I don't think there was any. I mean, no one in Madison or Dane County pushed for those changes, as far as I understand. This was
Just
the
a bit of political wins.
I believe so.
All right. Essentially, that would be ban the box, but for residential units.
Well, even beyond ban the box, it's actually a non-discrimination policy. So yes, because it wouldn't allow them to go back more than 2 years. It also, these other counties or other localities like San Francisco and Newark, not only is it a ban the box policy, it also requires individualized determination.
If you can find that information of anything that occurred, but also
Sure.
find that information post the removal of the legislation, what has been the impact of homelessness and formerly incarcerated in that area?
I will do my best and try and get that to you as
Thank
soon
you.
as possible.
Thank you very much. We continue with the men. Jeff Nemetsky, Executive Director, Brooklyn Community Housing and Services, and David Parkinson. Come on up. Officially, for the record, David Parkinson is a friend of Diana Goodwin, which is a very important thing to me. Jeff, why don't you begin?
Good morning. My name is Jeff Nemetsky, and I'm the Executive Director for Brooklyn Community Housing and Services, a not-for-profit supportive housing agency headquartered in Fort Greene. I would like to thank Assemblyman O'Donnell and Assemblyman Sepulveda for organizing this important hearing today and for inviting my agency to participate. I would like to thank the Assembly for offering such robust support for the efforts to create new supportive housing in general, and this committee and subcommittee in particular for its strong support of critical criminal justice-related reforms. My organization, BCHS, was founded in 1978 by a group of clergy from downtown Brooklyn and is committed to ending homelessness in Brooklyn. We now serve nearly 1,000 formerly homeless residents a year through a range of short-term, transitional, and permanent housing programs. 8 years ago, on a summer day not unlike today, one of our residents, Barry, was sitting in our Brooklyn Gardens courtyard, and he waved for me to come over. Barry was a soft-spoken, formerly homeless man in his 40s at the time, who had come to us through our reentry initiative called FUSE, which you've heard some about. And he had not previously said much to me since moving into BCHS, so I had no idea what he could want. When I approached, Barry got very excited and rushed to show me something he had been working on. Out of a tiny piece of white blackboard chalk, Barry had carved a very precise sculpture of a mother, father, and child all holding hands. He had used nothing but the tip of a pushpin, a thumbtack from a bulletin board, but his miniature sculpture was beautiful, and he beamed as I stood there marveling at it. Barry had spent most of his adult life cycling back and forth between jail, shelter, and hospitals. He had a mental illness and a history of substance abuse, and he had rarely lived on his own. I am happy to say that it has been 8 years since Barry came to us through our FUSE reentry initiative. He has maintained his housing with us this entire time and has not been rearrested or had any criminal adjustment involvement since then. He works as a volunteer 3 days a week for a local food pantry, helping to unload the truck and stock the shelves. And his intricate chalk sculptures have earned national attention. Barry is just one of 36 individuals who have participated in our reentry housing initiative since we began it almost a decade ago. And I'd like to tell you just a little bit more about this program. In 2006, as Kristen mentioned, the Corporation for Supportive Housing was rolling out a demonstration initiative called FUSE, Frequent Users of Services Enhancement, and our agency was happy to participate. Through FUSE, at that time, BCHS pledged to admit individuals into our OCAL SRO who met the 445 criteria. So these were individuals who had to have a minimum of 4 separate instances of incarceration, plus a minimum of 4 separate instances of intake into the city shelter system within the previous 5 years. While it wasn't a requirement of the program, BCHS also focused on predominantly taking in individuals who had a mental health diagnosis, individuals like Barry. I will add that in our experience, hardly anyone we admitted through the initiative had as few as 4 instances of incarceration, and we had one gentleman who had as many as 57 instances of incarceration during the prior 5 years before admission. As has been discussed, the idea behind FUSE was really to target those individuals who just kept cycling back and forth between jail and shelter and who had been relying on these as their primary forms of housing. Our staff had found in the past that individuals with such histories either had few employable skills or lengthy periods of time out of the workforce, faced a stigma when seeking housing or a job, experienced diminished physical and mental health, suffered from extreme cases of post-traumatic stress, and exhibited difficulties adjusting to life in a non-institutional setting. Given the challenges faced by individuals with a criminal justice background returning to the community, we had found that the likelihood of unemployment and a return to incarceration or becoming homeless was often great. BCHS discovered that in order to best prevent a return to the street or the criminal justice system, more tailored, specific interventions were really required compared to what we would typically do for our general supportive housing population. Thus, we used the additional funding we received through CSH and FUSE to create a new position of reentry case manager who had a lower than average caseload and received specialized training, while hiring a clinical consultant who was one of New York City's leaders in the provision of mental health treatment for people with incarceration histories. The case manager works one-on-one with each participant to create a service plan with concrete goals, which may include creating a budget, designing a daily schedule to minimize idle time, identifying training and education needs, developing a job search strategy, and working on socialization skills. In addition, the case manager monitors medical treatment, coordinates with the BCHS mental health clinician, substance abuse counselor, and employment counselor, and assists those participants still involved with the criminal justice system, particularly those who are on probation or who have pending court dates. FUSE participants also attend a weekly reentry support group facilitated by the case manager and the clinical consultant, where participants discuss their struggles and successes in adjusting to community living. For individuals who have often felt marginalized because of their circumstances, this support group has become an extraordinarily powerful vehicle that allows them to feel valued, understood, and accepted. BCHS's FUSE reentry initiative has worked extremely well, and we've kept it going with a few adjustments to the original admissions criteria. In each of the 9 full years it has been operating, there has been a 100% success rate for each of the 36 individuals for their first year in the program. In other words, so far, everyone who has been admitted has been able to maintain their housing successfully with us, or in some cases move on to greater independence during their first 12 months. Over time, since the program's inception 9 years ago, more than 80% of the 36 individuals have either maintained their housing with BCHS or subsequently moved on to other appropriate housing. As has been mentioned by other speakers, because supportive housing is so much cheaper than jail, prison, or shelter, the success of the program in reducing reliance on costly institutions has not only improved and in many instances saved lives, but has also saved taxpayers a significant amount of money. Based on our experience as both a supportive housing provider and a provider of reentry services, we strongly advocate for the creation of new supportive housing units that are dedicated to individuals with backgrounds of criminal justice involvement, with some enhanced service funding to ensure that services targeted to the specific needs of this population can be performed adequately. If this is done, our experience and the experience of many other similar providers has demonstrated that outcomes for this population will be significantly improved, allowing formerly vulnerable individuals to move forward with their lives in a hopeful, healthy, and productive way. Our local communities will be strengthened, and again, significant public dollars will be saved. Before concluding, I would like to take a moment to thank Governor Cuomo for pledging to support the creation of 20,000 new units of supportive housing over the next 15 years, with 6,000, as has been discussed, slated for the next 5 years, but we urge the governor to sign the necessary MOU before the end of session. And we applaud the governor for adopting the New York State Council on Reentry and Reintegration's recommendation to include the formerly incarcerated as a target population for supportive housing. Once more, I'd like to thank Assemblyman O'Donnell and Assemblyman Sepulveda for inviting me to speak. I truly appreciate it. And I'd like to thank you both for your commitment to supportive housing for the reentry population and for being such strong advocates and leaders for both supportive housing and criminal justice issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr.
Thank you.
Parkinson?
Good morning. Thank you so much, Assemblyman O'Donnell and Assemblyman Sepulveda, for having me here.
By the way, I want to thank all the guests for properly pronouncing my name this morning. That's a rarity.